how have you talked about those 4 points of balancing. How have you been able to balance making money, the business side, and the positive impact? The scales ever shifted sometimes, or how have you negotiated that?
It's a difficult one. So we have the fortune of not making enough money for that to be too much of a problem. um, but it comes down to sort of, in a way, like, go back to this idea of design and how you design the product and what that creates. For example, with one of our challenges at the moment. So obviously you'll know that the most dominant revenue model on the app in the app store is around subscription in the sort of content area, right? And one of our real challenges right now is how we find, because my issue with subscription is that it creates as a product owner, you're incentivized to keep people trapped within your system, dependent on your product. You're sort of motivated to maintain. Once you've got their initial subscription, you do everything you can to keep them. Whereas as a designer, someone who, what I really want from my outcome isn't someone who's constantly using our product. We want someone to become an independent creative practitioner where they can drop the product, and because they've internalized all the practices, and then they can go and use them in the rest of the world. And so this is just a really live issue. I think we have to, we sort of think about these things in really great deals. And the business model, revenue model, has an ethical impact on the result of the product. It's actually quite sort of tricky, and a tricky conversation to have with potential investors. But they say, oh, you just do subscription. It works really well for everyone else. It's like, yeah, it does, but it's actually not the result culturally that I want to achieve. So it's hard.
Thank you. That was great. When you talked about the missing quadrant and you said that you don't get that feedback, you have to kind of find it. How do you do that? Do you ask people kind of sporadically, and also, is that like everyone is experiencing the same problem, or are there like varying levels and you have to do like kind of a case by case? How do you address that?
Yeah, so we just try and find people. So we get whatever channels we have, right? So we try and, so in that particular instance, I just bothered a bunch of people on Twitter through DMs who had, I saw, there was a pattern that I was looking for, which was they'd done an initial tweet saying they were excited about the app, and then they never said anything afterwards. So that indicated, that was just a proxy idea that maybe they weren't, that something hadn't happened, or so then that's when I sort of dug into that and then asked people around that. So I think that's, and what you do with that, I think a lot of it's around positioning, and it's like, so many people come to mindfulness because of issues around self-criticism. It's such a big issue. And then we as makers create onboarding processes which make people judge themselves, sabotage them even further. And so I think it's that first sort of point of the onboarding process where we make it really clear to people that let's just really softening that first experience. So it's not like we don't do everything you can from an interaction design perspective or just a process design perspective to not give someone a reason to judge themselves or compare themselves with someone else, or to compare themselves, to make them feel that they can't get to level 2 or level 3. So that's an example, we don't use any of that progressive type design. Because I feel that it's a way of you're sort of, okay, here's level 1, level 2, level 3, and that sort of implies someone like, oh, okay, I'm now at level 0, and so it was like these sort of subtle things around the way you design a content process or a mindfulness process creates a structure of how they understand the practice. So it's all maybe we think about it too much, but I think it's important.
Do you have any recommendations, maybe things that have worked for you for encouraging people that you think might benefit from a mindfulness practice? Anything that kind of gets past those barriers that they might be stuck behind?
Can you ask the question in a different way? You mean how do you encourage people to get into it in the first place, or?
Yeah. Or can't you?
Yeah, I think people get into mindfulness for two reasons: crisis or curiosity. 80% of people get into crisis. Maybe it's some kind of stress, burnout, bereavement. So you don't want to wish that on someone. um, so I think, and it's only rare number of people relatively rare number of people who just like are interested in the nature of their mind and interested in understanding it and then just pull on the thread. I think there's an interesting sort of thing at the moment where, because more and more people are getting into mindfulness, people are getting very evangelical about it. And there's nothing more annoying than your friend who's really into mindfulness and go, hey, you must, it's amazing. Watch out for those people. Because if it's not meaningful for you, then you're not gonna, you want to do it. And I think the secret, if anything, the secret for getting into meditation mindfulness is playfulness and fun. And I think because so many people approach meditation as something that it's another thing on the to-do list. It's a work, it's a chore. Well, I've got to go to the gym, I've got to do my X minutes a day. And that's a crappy attitude for getting it's like brushing your teeth. It's like, that's just incredibly like, it's not the way in. The way in is like through fun and playfulness and joy. So I'm always like, so my encouragement is like, just try some different techniques, and like it's an emphasis of the book actually. The real emphasis on playfulness and creativity, and like really sort of find the sort of technique and style that you find fun and enjoyable, and then just really use that. Like joy is the lubricant of success in mindfulness, if that's not a weird phrase, but it absolutely is. And because that's what makes habit. Because once you get into meditation mindfulness, the next challenge is keeping it going. And that is another massive drop-off from people. And then the secret of that is that then it's like all about fun and play and like just sort of pulling that thread of enjoyment. Because you want the best teachers of mine have always encouraged playfulness. And that's sort of something I encourage in my style as well.
Who is your target demographic?
So for right now, the target demographic is people who've heard about mindfulness meditation, but feel like the way it's presented isn't for them. If you think about the meditation tradition, sort of historically, like if you wanted to get into it, you had to go to a class or a course. It's very time intensive. It might be wrapped in a spiritual wrapper, and those are really high barriers for people to break down. And so the core conceit of everything we do is what's called mobile mindfulness, which is practicing wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Because the number one scarce resource in our culture is quality time. And if it's sort of the thing that breaks my heart, which is like, on one hand, the meditation world says, hey, meditation's great. And on the other hand, it says but to get it, you need the one thing you don't have. So like solving that problem. So that's, for me, it's that. It's like people who are, and there are different value propositions for meditation, whether that's stress reduction or better self-awareness or concentration or performance. There's all these different ways you can cut it depending on what techniques you have. But for me, it's like lowering barriers into. So it's a quite broad answer to your question, but I hope that works.
As you've been building your company, how do you build mindfulness into the culture of the fabric? And I'm sure some of that comes from you're hiring people who already are predisposed, but what processes are like?
I tend to hire on core scale first rather than, because I'm a bit of a benevolent dictator of my company in that I like to own the mindfulness piece. I've worked in the past with hey, some of my best friends are meditation teachers, but they're not very good at taking direction because they're not used to. And so anyway, how do you do it? We measure well-being. So we optimize for well-being, and we do practices together, formally and informally. And everyone has a sort of, in the way we sort of, if you think of performance management or every 3 months, people have to name what they're learning about mindfulness these 3 months, how they're developing their own understanding. But I don't make it too much of a big deal as well. We're quite sort of, we don't sit in lotus position for 45 minutes every day. We just had a new guy join, Patel. He's sort of a psychology graduate and a sort of graphic designer. And he's interested in it, but I'm not like, and it'll happen over time, you know, and like, so the key thing for us is actually, we make it broader than just mindfulness. We make it about well-being. Like, is everyone doing okay? And we make our emotional lives part of the conversation of our day. And that's like something which is sorely lacking from a lot of companies, which is the 90s myth of professionalism basically also meant that people weren't allowed to be human at work. They weren't allowed to talk about their emotional life, when actually our emotional life is that which underpins so much of our success and pain during the day. And so we talk about that all the time. We talk about how, like, stuff you already do, like you check in meetings, like how you do it. Like, it doesn't have to, it's not complicated. But if you don't measure it in some way or talk about it, then it's a mistake.
Thank you so much, Rohan. Can I give you a